Greetings, everybody. Today, we are going to talk about how, at least in the United States of America, we can fix big tech censorship. And actually, it is not that difficult. Even though a lot has been said on the subject, there is an obvious solution, and we are going to discuss this shortly. But first, why censorship is such a big issue? Because it contradicts free speech. Why is free speech so important? Because it allows information to pass from one member of the society to another, and when such members of society go to vote, we need informed voters. Let's remember that voting is not just the right to determine how you should be governed. Voting also means that you determine how others should be governed against their will. So you do not want people who are uninformed or confused or driven by emotion to go in droves to the polling place and determine how you should be affected in the future. So what we currently have, we have the so-called, the proverbial public square that in the past was meant to be people imagine a physical location, usually marketplaces or city squares or the town hall and so on, has now morphed. We have online public square where we have tens of millions of people, even if not more, daily exchange, whether tweets, whether messages, whether uploading videos on YouTube, exchange information back and forth. And for many of them, this is one of the reliable sources to see commentary and criticism of usually unopposed points that can be seen in the mainstream media. We have seen big tech, namely Google and Apple and Twitter until recently and Facebook and so on, to actively censor more and more the information that passes between people. And the question is, why? And one common argument was, oh, these are private companies, they can do whatever they want. And the counter argument is, these private companies have near government power, so maybe we should ask the courts to say that if you engage in the activities of the government, especially without permission, then the same restrictions that apply to the government should apply to you. But this is a discussion for another time. Now, let's see, what can we do? We have several major players, but let's stick to Google and Apple. What do? They have almost complete control over the app market when it comes to cell phones, and also Google owns YouTube, and things are quite broad. In the United States, in the US Constitution, there is not just the First Amendment that can be applied. The First Amendment is a restriction on government and government agents to not limit certain forms of speech. And it is, before we move forward, it's something that it should be made quite clear. The free speech is not just the right of the individual who speaks. That's what usually people who debate bring the light on. But the overlooked part is that the free speech right is the right of the listener to have access to available speech or to be able to hear others. So it is not that some naughty person who says mean things online, let's censor him. That's the smallest part, and that's what they try to confuse you. The important part is you, the listener, who is treating you like a child and wants to stop the information from reaching you. Is it because you are not mature enough to hear that information? Or is it because somebody is afraid that you can actually hear useful information and ask questions? Let's keep in mind, if you are old enough so you can vote and thus determine how others should be governed against their will, how much more so you're old enough that actually you can make decisions for yourself whether an argument presented to you makes sense or not. So why are we having unelected people in Google or Apple to determine for millions of Americans what millions of Americans are allowed to see? The right of the listener is something that we must be focused on. Now, Since the First Amendment, whether or not it will be applied to large corporations, is a separate discussion, and it is for the courts to decide, and there are arguments why it should be, but that's for another topic. Let's see, is there a way to resolve this in an elegant manner, clean and once and for all? And in the United States, lo and behold, such method exists. Congress right now can actually do a lot. And what can the Congress do? Congress can use one of the constitutional powers that is vested with the federal government in the United States, and this is the Commerce Clause. What's the Commerce Clause? The United States federal government has the authority to regulate commerce between the United States and foreign countries, and also to regulate commerce between the states. That means interstate commerce. Anything that is outside the mom and pop store, pretty much nowadays, is an interstate commerce. The reason why the Commerce Clause exists is because back then, when the states were entering the new entity, the United States, they needed an assurance that influential states will not be able to dictate over the other ones what to do. It was a guarantee of a fair playing ground. And now, Commerce Clause has been used by Congress for the last 100 years, and now it is time to be used again. Why? It is not just the carrying of goods and services that Congress regulates through the Commerce Clause. It is anything that influences commerce. And it is quite clear that in modern day and age, interstate communication between hundreds of millions of people within the United States and also between United States and other countries does indeed have a great impact on commerce. So interfering with interstate commerce without authority by Congress is something that can be addressed. And what can Congress do? The Congress can pass a very simple bill in the House of Representatives, which will say something as follows. Congress has determined that communication between hundreds of millions of Americans is necessary to maintain informed society and greatly facilitates interstate commerce. Thus, Congress enacts the following act. It should be against the law to interfere with interstate communication, which is part of interstate commerce. Or to put it more precise, it should be against the law to unlawfully interfere with interstate communication. And what is unlawful interference with interstate communication? Any interference that has not been authorized by law or by court order. Thus, from this point on, Google and Apple could only facilitate interstate communication, but they should not interfere with it. And now people can say, oh, but there is that section 230 and so on. This is a paper tiger. This doesn't need to be paid much attention to. What we can just say here, unless the US Congress tells you how to censor speech between participants of interstate communication, those involved in facilitating such communication, like telecom companies or big tech, they cannot interfere unless there is a court order or an act of Congress. So, but people can say, oh, this is private property. No, up to a point. Imagine the government hires a private contractor to run a toll road. The private contractor builds the road, they put the toll booths, they collect tolls, but do they interfere with traffic? No, only to the point that they can collect their toll. But the private company that built and maintains, let's say, the highway, they won't be allowed to stop certain cars because the drivers have said something on Twitter, or to start applying rules of the road that are not something that the government has agreed. So, toll collecting company can manage a highway, they can maintain it, they can facilitate traffic, but they are not to unlawfully interfere with traffic. And here we have Google and Apple. We can say that the public has entrusted over time Google and Apple to facilitate interstate communication, but they are not to interfere with interstate communication once such communication is set in motion. So, a simple act of Congress, it shall be against the law to interfere with interstate communication absent court of law or act of the legislature, is something that your congressman should be told that they can start working on. Congress at the moment has a slight Republican majority, although the point should be made that this is not Republican versus Democrat issue. No, nobody in good faith should want to benefit from uneducated or confused voters. And to get voters properly informed, we need to recognize the right of the listener to choose what information they can listen to and to see for themselves. We cannot allow unelected entities to act as nannies in early ages and say, Jimmy, you're too young to listen to this podcast, therefore I know we have the right to vote, so you're old enough to vote, but you're not old enough to determine which political argument or which factual claim makes sense or not. So, under the Commerce Clause, it shall be illegal to interfere with interstate communication outside court order or an act of Congress. Thank you and have a great day.